Hi, everybody, and welcome to ToRAISE Questions, the To-Labor Doula podcast.
Hi, Sarah. How are you? Hi, everyone.
My name is Sarah Allen Short. I'm here with ToRAISE Hakoon.
Yes.
She is the executive director of To-Labor, and we do this little doula podcast for you guys. And
actually, it's not so little,
it's not so little anymore.
Nope.
We're punchy this morning, so excuse us.
But everything is, we're really very excited, aren't we, about our podcasts and how many people we're reaching and the really positive responses we're getting from everyone who is listening. We're just thrilled.
And if you want to advertise, let us know. We're reaching, about 30,000 plus doulas downloads a month. And that's doulas, birth workers, childbirth educators, midwives. Obviously, this is aimed at doulas, but a lot of other people are listening too. So if you have a business and you'd like to reach that group, please let us know. We have workshops coming up. Check our website, tolabor.com. We do birth doula training and certification. And our website has a list of the workshops coming up in early next year. And if you'd like to schedule one in your town, email tolaborworkshops@gmail.com. And when you look at the calendar, we're in the process of creating 2015. I mean, there's plenty of them up there, but do not think, they're not coming to us. If you, like Sarah just mentioned, if you're interested, contact our workshop coordinator, Nicole, and see if we can help you get a workshop in in your community as well. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get started. So, ToRAISE, I think what I want to talk about today is, I'm not sure exactly how to frame the topic, but it's something about dealing with unexpected outcomes. And I think we could talk about this over the course of a zillion episodes.
I think so too.
But what's on my mind today specifically is when your client is unhappy with their birth outcome, what is the role of the doula? And I'm not talking about stillbirths or emergencies or that's a separate topic. I'm talking about, and I don't even know if this kind of overlaps with traumatic birth, but I'm not even really talking about traumatic birth because I think that's a separate topic too.
Are you also talking about how not only the client, how the doula helps the client, but the just in case that the client isn't real clear on the role of the doula herself in the experience?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to what I'm thinking about today. And again, I think that's what we should talk about, and then we can talk about other aspects of this another time. But there's two aspects. One is what happens when the client has an experience that you feel they are having, you are surprised at their negative reaction to. And the second scenario is when the client blames you for something that happened.
Right.
Those are kind of the two kind of scenarios I'm imagining. So does that sound good?
Yeah, it sounds good because I think every doula has or will experience this. And, and then the third side of it is, which would be another conversation, so stay tuned, listeners, how the client is totally okay with outcomes and how the doula has the unexpected outcome processing.
Right.
Yeah, but that we can do another time.
Yeah, it's interesting because two births that I had as early on in my doula career, one of the very first births I attended, I thought was horrific. And the client thought was perfect and beautiful. And it was weird for me just to, she had a natural birth, but she was treated so awfully.
Right.
And for her, it was about she wanted a natural birth. She got a natural birth, but she ended up with a hospitalist who treated her very, very badly. She had a hemorrhage because they yanked that placenta out like a minute after the baby was born with force. And anyway, and a week later, a month later, she's like, "Oh, I had a beautiful natural birth." And
we'll talk about that.
So we'll talk about that another time. But I've also had the experience where I have witnessed a birth. And again, doula's feelings should not be involved, but they are. So I'm just, we're this is a podcast for doulas, not necessarily pregnant women. This is for the doula side. So I've been in a situation where I've seen a birth that I thought was fine. I thought she was treated with respect. I thought she made decisions. Maybe she ended up with an epidural when she didn't want one.
Originally didn't want one.
Right. So she goes into, in her prenatals is saying, I don't want any unnecessary interventions. And then she gets into labor and she changes her mind. And she is fully supported. She's given every opportunity. No one's pushing epidurals. And she is asked for an epidural. And regrets it later. And I think when I was a new doula, I thought that if someone's making the decisions, if someone's making the call, that doesn't happen.
Right.
We all hear as doulas, we have second, third time moms come to us all the time who tell us about these first births they had where they were bullied, they were pressured, they never knew they had another option. They were doing fine and the doctor came in and said, don't you want an epidural? Or they were induced at 38 weeks and they didn't know any better. We've all heard these stories. And I used to think that if you empower someone and you let them make their own decisions, that doesn't happen.
Right.
But and it's been kind of
eye-opening to see
that it still does.
And I think, it's almost like this topic doesn't even have to take a long time, though we'll take much time into it as needed. In the end, I think we all know that when that person, if you really are doing your job, which in your case, Sarah, I believe you are. And I think if you're doing your job the way we talk about it at workshops, which is just what you said, helping the person know what their options and choices are prenatally, helping them to be realistic about how flexibility has to be part of their birth plans, because we have no idea at the moment how anything is going to transpire. We can have our hopes, we can have our vision, we can prepare for all of that, but that flexibility is a huge part of the conversation with your client, that birth has its own authority and will make choices without you.
Right. Right.
And you empower them to have their voice, just like you said. And I still do believe that then the overwhelming majority of people will have a much better perspective on their birth. And those who don't, like the person that you might be, bringing up right now, who feels like, I'm disappointed, or why didn't you stop me from doing that? Or why was that even an option for me? I thought I didn't want that, or whatever they are saying. And in essence, what I hear is they're disappointed in themselves for making that choice. And it's really hard sometimes to accept being disappointed in yourself. It's easier to blame somebody else or the circumstances. And, the hardest part is to allow someone to dump that on you.
Well, so I think there's two situations. One is where they're blaming you for it. And one is where they're just, I want to talk first about the situation where they're not, because I think it complicates it if they're blaming the doula. Let's say they're not blaming the doula. They're just saying they had a disappointing birth experience. Mm-hmm. They wished it had gone another way. I'm thinking of a woman I worked with, and I think you're right, that when you prepare people prenatally, give them options and choices, let them make the call, most of the time they will say they understand how things, that they feel empowered. It's much more common. But I'm thinking of a woman who, at 38 weeks, an OB told her her baby was too big and she needed a C-section. And we talked about options and choices, and she was in midwife's care, but that an OB did an ultrasound and said her baby was too big. We talked about the stats about babies being too big, being often overestimated by late ultrasounds. She talked about it with her midwife. She made her own choice not to do that. So she waited and waited and waited. She started getting articles about shoulder dystocia, this sort of thing. She waited and waited and waited. Finally, at 41 weeks, she decided, the midwives were saying, we think this might be a good time to get this baby because we're just really nervous. They said, you don't have to do this. She decided to do the induction. With all of the information, all the pros and cons, she decided did it. The Pitocin was incredibly intense for her, as it is for many, many women. She ended up with an epidural. She had what I witnessed as a beautiful, supported birth. She was allowed, quote unquote, allowed to try she did the tub, she did every position, she did everything. The midwives were there with her. They sat with her. They weren't busy that day. I was there. Her husband was there. She had a very private birth. There was nobody else in the room. She did everything that she possibly could. And she finally said, I need an epidural. I can't do this anymore. And we delayed it. It was her choice. And I was really shocked to hear 3 months later, she was saying that she wanted to join a group for traumatic birth. And so this is one of the situations I want to talk about.
Right.
As a doula, is your role to say, and I can tell you what I did, but I'm interested to hear what your thought is. Mm-hmm. Is your role to say, to totally 100% just support because that's to support their view of their birth. Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm sorry you had a traumatic birth. This birth was traumatic because it didn't go the way she wanted it.
Right.
Because she had Pitocin and an epidural, and she had decided, despite extensive prenatal conversations about how some of this is out of her control, she didn't want that. Now, she chose those things.
Right.
No pressure.
Right, got it.
But given the information. So is your role as a doula to say, just to listen and validate and say, I'm so sorry you had a traumatic birth? Or is your role as the doula to say, let me frame this for you a different way? You saved yourself a C-section, which other women might have ended up with at 38 weeks when the doctor recommended it. You birthed your baby vaginally. You did not have a shoulder dystocia. You listened to your instincts every step of the way. This is a triumph of you making the right choices that allowed you to have this baby vaginally. And if you had made different choices, you might not have had the same birth in a bad way. Mm-hmm. So what do you think?
Well, again, I go back to when you're dealing with a person who has this vision of their birth, they're disappointed in themselves. That's what I was saying. Mm-hmm. Whether they're blaming, it's hard to be disappointed in yourself and blame somebody, but some people, and so sometimes they lash out, and in this case this person wasn't lashing out towards you.
And they weren't blaming the midwives or anything. They
they feel disappointed,
so traumatized by this birth that I saw as,
I think both things are the answer, depending on your client. I mean, first,
trauma's in the eye of the beholder, right?
Well, we have gotten to know our client through the prenatal and through the labor, and we have what I hope is somewhat of a good insight as to the personality and how we can best deal with somebody. I mean, that's part of the role of a doula, is trying to meet the person where they are throughout that pregnancy, so we are walking with them through each step of the way. So I can't give a black and white answer to this, Dan.
You never give black and white answers, man.
Because it would depend on your client. I think there are some people, Sarah, where they are just so very invested in that perspective that it truly is the trauma to them. And you could say what you just said, or should I say, or should the doula say, your part B?
Right.
You could say that, and you would add to her trauma, because you would just be ignoring her perspective of that. And she was, like I said, there are people, and I say that with all due respect, but the word that comes to me is they're invested in the trauma. And that's not in a negative, I don't mean that there's something wrong with that person. It's just, that's my word. So you could just then, that kind of person, you may just say, I think if this is what you're feeling, and of course I would want to hear why they felt that way. I mean, I would be listening to their story. I would want you to be listening to their story, how they saw so I had a real grasp of the perspective long before I gave any response. And then if I really felt like they were just this is what they felt they needed to do. I would say if you really feel that it would be beneficial to go to a support group that is going to help you through this experience, then I support you on that. And anything I can do to assist you further, guide you, let me know. And if you want to be in touch through this time or after, please do. Other people, you're going to do exactly what you said, which I think was perfect. After listening to their story, maybe you'll have an inkling that this is their perspective, but they're open to figuring out if their perspective isn't quite accurate. Like, maybe it's just, I can't believe I did that. I mean, I know what I thought I was going to do for this labor. I had this whole vision, and now, how did I do that? I mean, I think... that grappling, they've left the door open more, perhaps, that person, if you're listening. And then you could say, can I give you my perspective on the birth? And it's just my perspective, not that it's better or right than yours.
Right.
But here's how I saw it and how I look back on your birth, and can I share that with you? And if they say yes, then you would say what you just said, Sarah, which was great. This is what you made this choice, and it was a good, wonderful choice, and then so forth and so on.
You chose the right care providers. Right. You chose a doula. You chose to be educated. You made a lot of decisions. And I know it isn't what you anticipated, but remember we talked about, I hope you don't, we talked about how birth can have all these twists and turns to it. I also frequently bring up in that kind of situation, one of the things I've learned from you that I love so much and share with so many of my clients, which is that pregnancy, birth, labor is preparation for parenthood. And guess what? There's going to be a million times when you're raising this little baby that you think...
You're going to do it this way.
You think you're going to do it one way and another way ends up happening, or you end up choosing another way, or, any number of things.
Exactly. And I was going to say that, but I thought, I say that all the time.
I know. I think
but it is true.
I think it's good to, it's just such a shift. It's such a shift for women who are used to being able to
control things.
Well,
that's it. And that's where prenatally, I realize really all of this work is so, and I say this at every workshop, this is prenatal. I mean, it's prenatal time, conversations, getting to know the person that you're working with, and helping them really to understand how they need to be flexible. And I think a lot of doulas have a hard time with this also, and understandably, that they'll have a client that is adamant and yes, this is what I can do. And you don't want to ever bring them down. You don't want them to feel like you doubt them, or that, it may not work. And this is especially for women who are wanting to have a VBAC.
Right. Which we've discussed a little bit. Yeah.
Right. But it's that reality, though, too. The world doesn't work that way. I mean, there is, and it does go to parenting, but it just goes to their own life. How many things always go exactly as they planned? And you know when it does? When they actually have some form of control over it. But birth isn't.
Or luck.
Yeah.
Or a combination of things.
Right. But birth isn't.
How do you say that? So we've all had clients that say, I will be devastated. I will be devastated if I don't do this naturally, or I know I can. I'm so excited. It's going to be awesome. I'm not afraid at all. It's going to be incredible. I'm ready for this challenge. Do you sort of
I say I think that's wonderful. I think that's something to affirm yourself with every day, and feel it inside, not just say it, but really own it, live it in your body, and then surrender. And I always describe surrender as this way, because I know that there's so many other people like myself out there. I don't think that I'm that unique.
ToRAISE is a huge control freak. For all of you who think she's this peaceful, calm, wise, yogic, She does
control.
have that side of the wise woman, but she also
likes to control things.
Has her
own
control issues.
So what I realized growing up was, I actually didn't have this realization. Growing up, I had to fight and survive, and so to surrender was just such a dirty word. It just meant that I had given up and I allowed my power to be taken. So I found that not an okay word. And then when I gave birth, I understood the word surrender. It totally transformed my perspective of that specific powerful word. I saw that birth allowed me to surrender to the power inside of myself, not the power outside of myself. It was in my body. So that's what my conversation is with somebody, is plan it, love it, envision it, affirm it, and then feel it in your body, not just say it. It can't be all in your head. You can't think this. You have to know it. And then when you go into birth, you surrender. You surrender, and then even if it doesn't turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out, you will have, I think, a healthier perspective and feeling inside of yourself, because you have owned the fact that you really, if it, like that woman who made that choice to have the Pitocin and the induction and the epidural, what she's doing is what we all do, is second guessing herself.
Right.
It's that, well, what if I hadn't? The what ifs. And if you really had the vision and then you have the information, you really in the end are only battling yourself. You're not giving yourself credit for the fact that you made a really good choice at that moment. That was the decision that at that moment spoke most loudly to you. And now, because you're away from it, you're second guessing yourself, and
which we all do.
But what I also then say is, how does that feel when it's you who has made a decision and somebody is standing on the outside saying to you, well, why did you do that? Second guessing your choices. You don't like it, so why are you doing that to yourself?
Right.
You know, like, it's hard sometimes to accept that we made the choices we made.
I tell people sometimes you're talking to yourself like you would never talk to anybody else. If you had a friend who did this, you would never be saying, why did you do that? You shouldn't have done that. Right. What if you could have lasted another hour?
And if they were saying that, somebody saying that to you, it would make you feel really poor.
Yeah.
And that's what we do to ourselves. And I think it's that's part of our thinking brain.
I think part of what enters into this conversation too is space and distance. That sometimes this is just a process, and you can't, we all of the doulas listening know that you've had clients who are blissed out 3 days after a baby that 2 weeks after are going, wait a minute, I didn't love this part of it, or vice versa. Things really change. You look at a birth different from, you think about your birth differently 3 days after, 3 months after, 3 years after, 30 years after. You think about a birth very differently, and sometimes people just need a little bit of time. And what I would say to someone in the right situation is that what did you learn from this that you're gonna, if you're really beating yourself up, what did you learn that you're gonna apply either to your next birth or to your life in general?
And I think what you said is the right time, because, and I guess I
would not say that to somebody 3 days after they have a baby.
No, and I would be careful, even the person who is expressing the disappointment. It's more like, okay, so let them just be in the moment of that.
Right.
And then the learning part, I guess that's an issue for me. I don't want to always have to learn something, so it's more like when you're ready for your next birth, if you choose to have another baby, it's not going to be the same experience, but what you have had in this experience can carry forward into the next one, as far as your perspectives and your visions as well. But again, you're going to have to surrender to that birth as well. It's like, I remember someone very close to me going through a different circumstance, and a year later after the experience, someone who loved, really cared about them, asked the question, so tell me, what did you learn in this past year? And it so angered that person because they were like, I learned that life sucks. Is that what you want me to tell you? Like, don't ask me what I learned or what I'm going to learn. So it's a fine line. Mm-hmm. It's gently, we're in the moment, because the truth is, even if they learned something from this, how it applies the next time.
I think I'm trying to get less at what did you learn than what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to beat yourself up about it forever?
That's what you wanted then address.
Someone who a year later is looking at a birth, and I want to be very careful, because I know I do not want to invalidate anyone's experience. And there are people listening who are not only doulas, but who had these feelings themselves.
Absolutely.
I with my first birth, I have a lot of sympathy. With my first birth, I just was surprised it was hard. And I was really disappointed in myself that it was hard. And I can't explain it any other way. And I was kind of rocked by it.
Mm-hmm.
I say my first birth, I said for weeks after, I said it was the best day and the worst day of my entire life. I had no idea. And I had anybody watching it would have said you had your midwives and your mom and your best friend and your husband and this beautiful natural birth and a birthing center on a bed, and you labored in the water, and it was amazing, and candles and music, and it was beautiful. And I was like, holy crap, that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I was kind of rocked by that. And I just needed some time.
Right.
But sometimes when I'm talking to someone who, it seems like they want to stay there.
That's it. What I mean,
I want to be
some
very
people
careful.
Are invested in that, and that's where I can't. Like I said, it's not a black and white answer, because it's the individual that you're working with. And I hope that you are listening and you know them well enough by this point to know how to respond back to them in a compassionate way, because. One thing I learned very early on in my parenting, once my kids could start to share, was their perspective and my perspective are so often so different. And you think we know that about other things in life, but it never becomes clearer than when you're a parent. How they tell their story of an event or their upbringing. And so what I had to learn, and it really has been applied to everything else in my life, is if that's what somebody perceives to be the truth, then I have to acknowledge that that's their truth.
I hate that.
I know.
You're right.
But it's hard. But then some people, like I said, they don't really want to be invested in that. They really do want to hear somebody else's perspective that could help them have a cleaner, clearer pathway to walk on.
Right.
And others aren't. And those are the ones that will need you just to support them to get help somewhere else then, too.
Yeah. So let's do this. Let's talk about what happens when they blame you in another episode, because I want to wrap this up. And so thanks, everybody, for listening.
Yeah,
we're going to kind of abruptly stop and break this into 2 episodes, because I think we've talked about this for a while. And our next episode will be about what happens when the client is upset with you and your role.
Right.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Bye.